Welcome to episode 3 of the ongoing series where we review case studies that are submitted by people. And the anchor or the hook for our case studies is Agile will fail at my company because. And today's case study revolves around annual budgeting planning processes. And this particular case study is submitted by someone anonymously, so we have no idea who submitted this particular case study. But we do have three amazing panelists here to help us out with this particular situation. So I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves first. Then we'll describe how we are going to review this case study format.
I'm Tom Perry, and my company is called Thomas Perry LLC, and I'm based up here in Seattle, Washington.
Thank you, Tom.
My name's Neil Jacobson. I'm a product and solutions lead at Pfizer, focusing on patient and connected health solutions. Working in an agile transformation, have a background in project management and product owner and agile. That's all.
Welcome, Neil.
And I'm Ron Whitebread. I'm with Cisco, the food company, not the network company, based out of Houston, and moved from being a door-to-door Scrum salesman or Agile salesman to a Scrum master, an Agile coach, and currently now I'm a Scrum master on a group of teams here while still coaching too.
Yeah, Ron, you've had a very long commitment to the Agile movement. You started the local ALN Houston here, the chapter here for Agile leadership. I remember how you were the only guy at Cisco trying to promote Agile until they moved on to actually did something about it, you know?
Yeah, when we had a change at the IT leadership level there, they were either more familiar with it or they were more open to it. So we got to experiment, and then we actually got to expand on that finally.
Right? No, thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and let's look at the case study that has been submitted, and I'll try to justify the the uh, the frustration here, right, from the individual who provided this case study. Uh, I hope I can do justice to it. Okay, so so in this particular case study, Agile will fail at my company because of the annual planning and budgeting process. And when this case study was submitted to us here at Evolve Agility, the challenges that were expressed was with the annual planning and budgeting process, it's very difficult for the organization to embrace uncertainty when new items need to be worked on because the business keeps on evolving and things change. The management still holds the team and the organization accountable to year-old plans and budgets. Now, when these new emergent items are not planned for in the budget, they still expect that the business expectations or needs will be met, but at the same time, there are no adjustments made to the previous expectations that were laid out almost a year and a half ago when they participated in the planning and budgeting process. So you can imagine the chain reaction of dysfunctions, you know, that get along the way. So here, as we go into the first round, our panelists are going to select three hashtags out of this set. And then they're going to provide us with some insights as to why they think this hashtag is appropriate for the case study around Agile will fail because we have an annual planning and budgeting process. So who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, Ron, help us
So
out.
kind of the first smell that I picked up on was the culture.
Right.
And I think it's because it evolved, or it has evolved to the point where it's at, where that's just kind of the accepted norm. And there's not going to be a whole lot that's going to change without some pain, and nobody wants to get uncomfortable. So we just carry on with what we've always carried on with. And
Right.
I think a lot of that kind of drives the second one, which I would say is management.
Uh-huh.
And management, uh, there is power in numbers, whether it's dollars or whether it's in people.
Right.
So to hang on to what you've been able to win through the projects that you'd selected for the annual budget, adding more to it just feels like it gives them more influence over the organization than really they might actually have. So they have no incentive to change.
Right.
And then the third one, I kind of bounced around there. I looked at project, I looked at program. I really didn't see one that said portfolio, but one that kind of fits that is the roadmap.
Right.
And that's basically looking at, if they're just planning year to year and not looking at the long range and
Right.
not allowing for things that are going to change, they're setting themselves up for this conflict, this failure,
Right.
by not allowing that to be part of what they want to work on and what they want to enable themselves to be more agile, if indeed that is their objective.
Right. Ron, could you elaborate a little bit more on your powers and numbers comment? Because that was very interesting. Because you used the notion of dollars and the power that amount of money gives. I'm very curious to explore
Mhm.
that a little bit more.
I think it's because there's a perception there's more power if they have more people reporting up to them in the organization.
Right.
And if they have more projects, that might mean that they have more people that are either directly reporting to them or that they have more influence in other areas in the organization.
Right.
So it's kind of a status symbol, maybe.
Ah. And for the third one, would you pick roadmap or portfolio? Even though portfolio is not here, would you still pick roadmap or portfolio?
Well, it's the lack of really having a portfolio level planning, and there's a number of ways that they can do it. But the roadmap would be the long term picture, but portfolio management was really kind of what I was looking for, just because they're only looking at single discrete projects instead of looking at the bigger picture of where are the areas we should be focusing on. Are we looking to innovate? Are we looking to just keep the lights on?
Right.
Or are we trying to improve what we have to have a better customer experience? So until they start making those decisions based on that type of a thought process, then they're just throwing out standalone projects that are either going to conflict with other projects or just borrowing the same resources and struggling all the way.
Thank you. By resources, you mean people, right?
Yes. I'm only using that term because it's a common term. I hate the term.
Yes, indeed.
Human resources. We're not resources.
We are people. We have feelings
It's,
too.
I love companies that have people departments, not
Right?
HR departments.
My three hashtags, I started off with capacity, because oftentimes what you see as an outward manifestation of this kind of mindset is a huge focus on capturing your capacity, what your resourcing is available, what resourcing is available, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. It's
Mm-hmm.
this enormous waste of time. So that's what you're going to see in an organization like this is your project management organization very likely is going to be obsessing over trying to understand exactly what capacity they have and micromanaging that to a degree that's painful to watch. I think the other hashtag might be beyond budgeting for me. I think that one of the conversations here is one that is, I mean, the fundamental underlying conversation is the budgeting process.
Right.
And the nice thing about beyond budgeting is that it's not specifically agile. It's it's been around for a couple decades now. It's something that is very agile in its underlying principles, but I can compartmentalize that and introduce that to the finance guys as a new idea that I don't have to sell them Agile. So and so there's it's I found that it's very very useful to be able to walk in and talk their language around their problems, and beyond budgeting is a great way to do that. Another hashtag, the final hashtag might be, and I just made this up, but
Yes.
it's outcomes over outputs. Um,
Ah,
so, so with this group that's focusing on project-based accountability and rigid road mapping and planning, the easiest way I found to get them to start shifting is to start talking or having that conversation with the executives about focusing on outcomes rather than outputs. And that can be a very healthy way for them to start gently reorienting themselves to holding people accountable. We're still going to do that, but we're going
right.
to do it towards outcomes rather than these outputs, which may be irrelevant by the time the teams get there. And so I found it's an easier conversation to get towards what we're aiming for there, which can be very difficult.
Right, right. I totally feel for you. An old project manager taught me this trick. Like, if you don't get the right estimate, just ask them to do it again.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It'll be lower this time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Great. So let's see. I'll start by silencing that. uh, so the first tag I came up with, I guess I smelled that it was a organization with a project orientation. So I said product. That's the tag I'd like to put because I think that offers a lot of opportunity. And the project orientation, I think, can be very kind of internally facing, and the product orientation moves it. So now we're thinking about the customer and we're thinking about some sort of product or experience, and can move towards the outcome orientation that Tom was talking about.
Right.
Directly related to that, then the next tag was roadmap, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a way that we can start to communicate kind of the forward looking, but
Right.
not get bogged down into the detail of a project type detailed estimate, and essentially have to think about change control if we um, do more, do less, make decisions along the way.
Right.
And
Right.
the last one is that um, it seems like they've embraced some agile principles, but uh, the fact that they haven't tackled this and it's key to the success, I said transformation. Essentially, they still have work to do. It's more than just installing agile teams. So many organizations, the folks, especially in information technology, uh, do it, we're comfortable with it. And yet, if we're going to be successful as an organization, we have to
Right.
transform beyond the team level.
I like how you are bridging to the comment of the product versus product with the conversation that Tom had, where Tom expressed the focus on outcomes over outputs. This is a pivotal conversation, isn't it? To say we are a project organization and let's start focusing outward as opposed to looking inside, and go through the pain of capturing capacity, as Tom was saying. You know, uh, I I really like your comment around the transformation piece, because it's definitely something that goes beyond what a single team can handle, and it requires what? Like, what does it require, Neil? Like, how do we? If I'm in a
Well, I mean,
team,
there, so if they're involved with multi-team work, then we have to be able to coordinate. If
right,
if it's more about like the total capacity, then we have to be able to shift capacity to teams, and perhaps we can have standing teams that we route the work to. And the last thing, if we need to flex with resources, people. If we need to
Right.
move people around, then they need essentially a way of working. So it's an agile way of working so that people may move from team to team or form new teams, and yet everyone knows what needs to be done and how we do it within that particular organization.
Thank you. Thank you. No, this helps a lot. Let's look at like what hashtags were provided by the case study submission person, and then we'll look at how you all scored on the hashtagged game. Remember, these are story points. We're going to measure story points for Brett at the end of this particular case study review.
Match game.
Yes. All right. So the hashtags that were selected by the person who submitted was culture. So that's one for you, Ron. Like you totally captured where they were coming from in terms of what's going on. You also captured the second one, which rotates around management. You see, so that's definitely a good hit. In terms of transformation, which is the third hashtag that you captured, Neil, over here. So I'm curious about how it looks like we kind of got in our panel a gist of where they are at, and in terms of additional hashtags, how do we feel? Like how do you feel about these particular selections over here?
So I think there is a close overlap. When is it a management conversation? Oh yeah, and in fact, you're wasting your time if you're anyplace else. And so if I was going to start with budgeting, I would be starting at this is a top level conversation. If you
Right,
can't have that top level conversation, you're hosed to begin with. And so this is not bottom up work. This
right.
is very much top down. So management totally makes sense. And then as a part of transformation, always, I don't think I've seen it any place where we've done a transformation. Although I would make the case that most transformations, it happens fairly late in the game.
Right. So the way I would assign story points to all three of you, and I think it's a very close tie. So there is a lesson here for people who are still watching on YouTube. our little interview. Uh, we got 13 points for all three of you, but all three stories were different, but they were kind of similar. So kudos, we all got 13 points, so there is no winner until we go into bonus round, which revolves around what are you going to do? Let me paint the picture. You are a person in an organization. Maybe you could transfer yourself to 5 years from now or 5 years in the past. You don't have access to senior management, and you're seeing this function unfold every year. In fact, you probably can set your clock to say in December people are going to behave this way. In January, this is how people are going to behave. So if you're in that position, what would you do if you were in that situation?
Well, typically the initial requests that I've seen anyway have been come from high up in the organization where it's going to be your finance director or VP who is driving the annual budgeting process. So that person is going to be kicking things off, and they're going to be sending out information requests basically to the PMO
Right,
to get the PMO to start giving them initiatives, a list of all the things that they need done, and also capacity. And so those requests are going to start kicking off from around there. They're working with the executive team, of course, with strategy and stuff like that. So it's all part of a larger plan. And so oftentimes it's top down, it's originating on the budgeting side, on the financial side, and so that's where it's typically coming from. And the challenge there is that they're operating on pretty old models. So they're operating on these annual budgeting plans with these models of product development that are basically project oriented, project based, um, and they have a mindset of a certain kind of accountability, and usually they're frustrated with it. Usually everybody's not, I mean, I've never seen annual budgeting be a happy process.
Right.
You know, it's because, I mean, annual budgeting took 14 months.
No kidding.
No
But
kidding,
that's
no
more than
joke.
2 months more than a year.
Very good. So it was a bit of a mockery of a process because you couldn't even finish it in a year, you know, in order to come up with your plan. And so this just led to this general cynicism throughout the organization because everybody knew you were going to get dragged into this and asked for estimates and then told those estimates were not good enough, and you get further requests and red lines, and by the time you do that, some of the initiatives are no longer relevant, they've been canceled, and so it just kind of swirls. But the executives are frustrated because they're not getting the answers they want. They're feeling time pressure from customers, and so they put more and more pressure on the situation in the hopes of discovering,
The
you
magic
know,
answer.
yeah, right,
I was going to say, kind of tying in the culture and the management and Tom's budgeting and Neil's project. It's kind of this dance. They put in these requests for these projects. They get one shot at it, so they go and they ask for everything, and it's kind of like a negotiation. You
Right.
know, you go into to sell a house or a car or something like that. They
Right.
start with the highball price, and then they say, okay, you need to cut that. So they say, okay, well, we'll cut some of these things out. And okay, now they come back with this. So it's kind of back and forth until they get their bucket of money to to hopefully do what they were trying to do in the first place there. You
Right.
know, finance trying to drive them to lower costs, and management's trying to introduce new costs. It's that constant back and forth negotiation that nobody wins, but they end up with something somewhere.
Right. Right. So far, sorry, Niels, go ahead. What are your impressions on this process?
So I think that I like the comment about that's the one shot, and I guess I've seen a lot of that, and often the orientation from the business unit that that is in charge of the thing to be built
Right.
is
Right.
is like a one and done orientation, kind of not the product orientation, because the organization has no mechanism to continually fund the product over time, or platforms that can support multiple products. And so um, it's almost counter to the project request governance for every, the stage gates around understanding the business case, knowing it makes sense, allocating the resources, delivering your project, the outcome, shut that down, then ask again. And that
Right.
particular business unit is then, oh, we're done. And yet what the organization really, if they're getting the most value from the product perspective, there's somebody looking over not only the long term, but looking at what's being created and seeing how it could be used across different um, or business units in the organization.
Right.
And there has to be financial mechanisms to cover um, funding. So like who's the first mover, who starts it out, how is it maintained, and how's that cost essentially charged to other beneficiaries across the whole organization.
Right. Right. Sometimes, I've and correct if my impression is wrong. Going back to Tom's earlier comment, where it comes top down, right? Is it typical for the C level to say, as our IT budget for this year, you get X amount of dollars? Now tell me how you're going to meet all of this business demand within the dollars that are already given to you. In other words, you have to make the best use of the money, as opposed to a bottom-up approach where you go to business and say, what do you want? And then we provide you, here's what it's going to cost. Either in simpler terms, that sometimes, have you seen like a budget dollar given to the IT department might be like, we're going to cut costs by 10%.
Yeah, that's like I said, that's typically the trend is they're trying to drive costs out, and management is trying to get work done, which is going to add cost to it. So it's that negotiation, and a lot of times, before it even gets to the finance group, they know that
Right.
they've got a certain amount to play with. They've the in between layer management has to kind of negotiate with the people requesting the work or the projects. Um, well, we can do these two, but not this third one here, or pick 2 out of 3. You can't have all 3 this year because we don't have the money for it.
Look, the thing that I've seen work that actually is just blew me away was simply saying, can we just bubble up the resolution from the low level, we have to approve every single project, to one level up, which is
Right.
we're only going to approve the big stuff. The little
Okay.
stuff doesn't require approval. It's all, we're going to make basically just, we're going to give out bigger buckets. They can be 10% down, they can be whatever they need to be, but
Right.
let's increase the bucket size and stop approving so far down. That also gets us to focusing more on outcomes of big initiatives and not outcomes of individual projects.
I think one of the things that to try to convey the impact of all these additional requests coming in on top of what they already have. I know pictures, analogies are powerful in terms of getting a message across. And you've probably seen that example of where somebody has like a cup of water or something like that.
Right.
And people, somebody just pours more into it until all of a sudden it's spilling over. So it's like, this is what we started with. This is what you gave us. And now you're adding this in here. So, not everything is going to fit in there. So you have the opportunity to decide if you want to add more in, what are you going to take out to make room for it? If they
Right.
get that concept, they say, okay, now if dollars and cents are the language you speak, consider with the work that we're doing, we're running at a certain run rate. We spend a
Right.
certain amount of money to do the certain amount of work. If you want to add more work, the only way you're going to increase the run rate is to give us more money and more people,
Right.
or you're going to have to reprioritize things and say, this is more important than what you're currently work on. Take it out so that we can still live within that budgeting run rate that we have for the work that we do, whatever that work is.
Yeah, I mean, if you start from the top level, I think what they need to do is provide like strategic priorities, a small number of them, and then the business units take those and essentially describe how the work they're proposing is going to support those strategic priorities. And then from there, that gets turned into the products that are going to support it. And those roadmaps then map, and you're starting to define what you believe can achieve that. The roadmaps have to be stated in terms of like a product KPIs. So it's really,
Right.
how are we going to measure whether or not we're doing it? Those KPIs should really be towards the customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer.
Right.
And then ultimately you need to have the feedback loops where we can now report back on a regular basis. Are we've you gave us the resources, we've implemented it, did we achieve what we needed to? And you have to have then the flexibility to review and make adjustments. And obviously annual isn't enough. There's a lot of different ideas about how often and how,
Right.
but so those conversations have to happen. And then there has to be mechanisms that when you do those reviews, there's enough flexibility to move the resources people essentially
Right.
to where they can make the biggest contribution to the organization. It kind of depends on how the organization is approaching it. I mean, I guess I'm a believer in persistent teams.
Right.
If you have that, then you have to figure out how you can get work to the persistent team, which is
Correct.
not trivial because it could be coming from many parts of the organization. Organizations want to keep control over their resources, understandably.
Right.
But when you look from kind of the organization point of view, they may not be allocated in the proper place at that time. So then you need to shift them shift them over.
Right, right. I've always like wondered about this budgeting and the planning process, and I have a vague notion of a measure or a metric. I still can't put my finger on what it is, but it's around how quickly can you move your dollar allocation, and the organization also delivers on that, right? In other words, if I say I want to put $50 or 50% of my budget on outcome X, can my organization actually shift that fast?
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
that would be to me that would be like a measure of corporate agility. Frankly, it's like how quickly can you shift over?
Right. 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 Yeah. And with the annual budgeting process, you're probably locked in, no, to like a one year, and in some cases, as Tom was saying, greater than a year. So you almost have to plan 2 years ahead for the annual budgeting process.
Or you're planning the budget before the year starts. The year starts, you're still working on it.
Right.
Far way into the year before you finally land on, okay, this is what we're going to have.
Right. Right.
This is
Right.
how
Right.
much is already gone of the
True.
year.
So let's see what our what the person who submitted the case study has tried so far. So we can probably build upon and provide some guidance or tips to this individual on what they should consider. No, in addition to what we've discussed so far. So what has been tried so far is they've tried to create an awareness on this particular issue. They've shared online articles and examples from other organizations that have done these quarterly rolling forecasts. They've tried to link sprint goals to funded items. So perhaps it sounds like a little bit of outcome focus. I don't know to what degree the sprint goals are related to outcome, and also linking discrepancies when new requests come in.
It does sound like they're looking for a way to justify. I mean, they're working on awareness. They're finding external examples. It seems like they're looking to drive cultural change, but you feel like it's not coming from the top down.
From a cultural change standpoint, does it work if you share and raise awareness, or is that something that you would approach it differently rather than sharing awareness or articles? What else can you try, or in addition to it?
Well, I'd propose an experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What could that experiment look like?
Pick a product or a business unit, define a new process with something different than the current annual planning and budgeting process,
Right.
and start by starting. I mean,
One of the opportunities you have here is that the finance guys are unusually data driven, and they're also typically able to give you a set of numbers for past performance. So
Okay.
you can, so those guys almost always can come back and say, look, here's what we committed to last year. Here was our performance on those commitments. They'll have raw numbers for that. So then you can work with them, and I've done this, where you say, what if we did it this way? Let's put it on paper. Let's put it in an Excel spreadsheet, at which point they all have an orgasm. And then you basically say, let's roll the numbers, let's run the numbers, and see
Right.
what it looks like if we change the focus from this level down to the next level up. And if you can do that, that's very compelling. And if especially if you're doing it in their language of Excel, that is very compelling. So that's where, and in terms of creating awareness, it's less. I'm not sure. I mean, to some degree, yes, you have to introduce the idea, no doubt.
Right.
But I wouldn't lean on that too hard. I would step into the experiment next, or and really what I'm talking about is just another variation on that. It's a test, if you will. Let's
Right.
test out the idea. And what you'll find is they'll say, we have an acceptable threshold. We can handle plus or minus 10%. We're comfortable with that. If you can show them you can fit within that threshold with changing a few things, they're going to be fine with it. They're going to, it'll be like deal done, we're sold. At least that's my experience. And at least, if they're fairly reasonable.
Right. Right.
Yeah, if you can, if for part of this experiment, if you can designate like a Pathfinder team or a couple teams
Right.
and give them a range
Hmm.
that they can work within, and then they can show them what's possible uh,
Right.
and grow it from there.
I'm wondering, it's almost like a transformation agile team, and the participant is the finance person. So essentially, you bring the organizational players in, they're bear hugged into the process, and essentially involved with each iteration and making adjustments. So
I feel like I should throw on another great idea that was discussed earlier on, which is to ask the executives about their strategic priorities and somehow link that to all of these efforts, even in a small end-to-end experiment, which includes the finance people and also the budgeting discretion that you're expecting to deliver an outcome. That could be quite powerful uh, as you said, Ron, as a pathfinder. This is how it could happen.
Mhm.
Any final comments to this individual?
I think they're definitely on the right track here in that it's the difference between really slow agile. Really, you can build agile under these kinds of budgeting constraints, but you're just building super slow agile, and so you'll get some benefit, but they've identified the problem, which is if until you deal with that budgeting side of things, you're not you're it's like the horse is shackled. There's no way it's going to be able to really be high performing agile until you can get rid of those constraints.
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. In literature and talking to people in the field, there's widespread agreement that this has to be changed in order to work. And there's all kinds of ideas about how it can be done. There's different frameworks, yet they're kind of the same thing. And I came up with kind of three principles that I think encapsulate it. And the first would be essentially around budgeting and planning. It needs to happen more frequently. Next, there has to be flexibility in the funding. So now you're reviewing frequently. There's
Right.
flexibility to make changes. And then the last, we need the feedback loops so that we can constantly hear what's happening that can inform our next iteration.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
I was just going to say, a lot of times when you're planning budget for projects, as kind of like a safety net, you put in contingency money or contingency things. If they made their annual budget that had a contingency amount and let them do those experiments and try it, they could grow that contingency because of the success they have, and then eventually convert all of the budgeting to that type of a run rate. Set your priorities on your portfolio and the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and that can head you in the right direction.
Oh, yeah. This is good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all your time, Neil, Tom, and Ron. This has been extremely helpful. So, folks, stay tuned. Subscribe to the YouTube link or subscribe to our channel, like or leave a comment, and we'll try to address your comments. Thank you.